Good evening from Vietnam, Leslie. Thanks a lot for spending your morning joining our Inside Sharing show and share your stories with our global audience. Now, on behalf of the listeners, I want to say thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate being invited here and I look forward to our conversation.
And Leslie, earlier you said that you've been to my country 20 years ago, and Vietnam now has changed a lot since the last time you came. So I hope that one day we will be able to see you in person in Vietnam again, and I'll be so happy to introduce you to our beautiful country this time. Okay?
Oh, thank you. And I hope the same for you if you ever end up in the New York area. I would love to take you around and show you some of the the spots that not everyone sees when they come to visit New York.
We definitely will come to New York in April of next year. So that's on our list already. So we just came back from the stay in February trip. We'll come back on August, but not in New York. So next year is in New York. Okay, and I definitely invite you for a cup of coffee there also.
Oh, great. I look forward to that. Thank you.
And Leslie, since you've been in my country already, you know our culture a little bit, right? It's a great honor if we can have you to do a little introduction about who you are and the works that you do. Could you do that for us?
Sure. Thank you. So, as you know, my name is Leslie Nydick. I live in New York City. I've lived in the metropolitan New York area all my life. I love the city. I'm also one of those people. I also love the beach, any beach. I'm a photographer. I love to travel. As you mentioned, I was in Vietnam. That was about 20 years ago. And like I was saying to you before, I just want to say the thing that still resonates with me is how I felt while I was there. I don't necessarily remember each day and what we saw. I remember the people, the welcoming, feeling like we belonged. And as I mentioned to you before we started, I was invited into people's homes, like for tea and for meals. I met a lot of artists, and they showed me their private studios and how they made their work. It was just that was the most precious part of the trip, and that's why I love traveling. It's you love the sights, but it's the people that you really remember and that feeling of warmth and welcoming. So that really changed me. So now, what I do, my work is I help teams and individuals essentially get unstuck from conflict. I do customized training, I do one on one coaching. I'm a part time faculty at New York University, and I share my tips and strategies like via my blog, The Strats, my YouTube channel, Twitter, and also on LinkedIn, which is where I think we found each other. Later this year, I'm actually going to start doing some more online courses. Something I the summary of like where I'm at and who I am.
Wow, wow. Leslie, we want to know more about you, and this program is designed for us to understand the journey that taking you to what you are doing today. So let's travel time together and let's examine that journey together. Is that okay with you?
Yes, yes.
Alrighty. Alrighty. So when I was young, really, really young, I wanted to become an astronaut. All right. And traveling to space seems so cool to me, but life didn't give me any chance to do that. So I want to know when you was young, what was your dream about your future though?
It's interesting you say you wanted to be an astronaut. I didn't have specific like professions or things like that. It was more about things that I like doing, uh, activities or challenges. I remember I loved math. I loved problem solving. Um, and that part has a little bit of a story. I always remember, like when we were doing algebra and geometry and all of that trigonometry, there was always students in the class saying to the teacher, why do we have to learn this? You know, this will have nothing to do with my life in the future. And I'd look at them going, this has everything to do with our life in the future. And I was young, but the teacher would say the same thing. Like, it's not necessarily that you're going to use trigonometry in your future professions, but it's the logic, it's the problem solving, it's all of that that I learned of how to even put things together. We don't have to remember the formulas, but I remember that kind of thinking that has to go on to figure things out. And I just love that. And that I slightly mentioned, I also loved putting things together, taking them apart. And I never wanted to read the directions. I just loved figuring out how it all works. Uh, but I also had, a creative side, art, painting, drawing, crafts. Some sports, I was nothing near being an athlete, but I loved activities, whether it was uh, ice skating, I loved tennis, then walking, which continues to be a big part of my life. And there was another, I guess, more businessy side to me. As a young kid, I was very entrepreneurial. I didn't know it was called being an entrepreneur. I was always, along with a sibling of mine, we were always creating businesses. Uh, Everything from some were typical in that era of I had a babysitting business. I wasn't just the babysitter. I had like friends that I pulled in and I would get them babysitting jobs. I had a recycling venture because we found out that they'd pay you if you brought the newspapers to this recycling place. So we started collecting all the newspapers in the entire neighborhood. Of course, we had not planned how to get them to the recycling center, and I did need to ask my parents to assist us with that. I had a swimming lesson business. Swimming was a big part of my life, tutoring. So that was always part of it. I did, but not with the thought like, oh, I want to be, a swimmer for the rest of my life. Oh, I want to be a tutor. It was more that I just kept on doing and exploring things, probably encouraged by my parents, who were both educators. Just let them explore whatever they want. Um, I also loved, I was very shy and introverted, but part of that allowed me to do something very interesting. I loved observing people, realizing that they communicated so much more than like with their words, that there was body language that meant something, and it was usually individualized for each person. I just loved observing that and listening. So when they would say, oh, you're not talking, and I'm thinking, but I'm listening. As we know, that's a big thing that people talk about now because most people don't know how to intentionally listen, and we'll probably get into that later. So it was a big mix of things, especially, when I was little, and I loved just exploring.
Wow, wow. So the little girl, Leslie, who was shy, introverted, and then do everything as business entrepreneur to like problem solving with numbers, right? And now you're doing the problem solving with people and their conflicts, and having them to solve their interpersonal problems, right? Tell us how that journey from there to what you are doing now, how that journey all started.
Well, one thing, just even reflecting on it, I always think it's interesting that I can make it sound like it was a straight line. It obviously wasn't, because I couldn't have imagined that this is what I would be doing now because I didn't really think that far ahead. It was more about finding things I liked. So even when I went to college, I went to Cornell University up in Ithaca, New York. So it was still in New York, but in a much more rural area. It was the picture of what I imagined college to be. It's this amazing campus, amazing landscape. I still didn't know what I wanted to do. I, I didn't quite feel the pressure either. that maybe someone of 18 feels today. I did not, whether it was my family or myself, I didn't have that pressure on myself. So I made sure I was in a part of the university where I could do the art, I could do the math, all those, I wanted to still explore all those different kind of courses, which you couldn't always do if you picked a very specific, if I went to the engineering school, I might not be able to take the art classes. So I was in the perfect college for doing that. And what happened is, excuse me, so I ended up finding this major that really mixed everything together for me. It was facility planning and management. There was design involved. There was managing real estate. I didn't even mention my love of real estate. Um,
Um,
I think I was born with that. It was in my DNA. And it was a mix of business management and all of that mixed together pretty much like touched on all those points that I was mentioning of what I enjoyed as a child. So that's what my career was at the start. I was managing real estate for organizations, design, construction, um, a lot of problem solving. And I worked for a wide variety of organizations, which I also enjoyed, that I wasn't just in one industry. I worked for a university when I first got out of college. I worked on Wall Street. I worked for the city of New York, developing homeless housing and doing tremendous construction. I've worked for a publishing firm. I worked for a startup. And I even worked for Radio City Music Hall. I don't know if you're familiar with that amazing entertainment venue. And there I did a lot more restoration kind of construction. So
um,
within all those organizations, the common factor was that my position put me in the middle of conflict every day. And yet I didn't necessarily feel the pressure. I just saw it as a problem. And that is what got me thinking like, wow, our mindset can really impact how we see things that some people see as very negative and maybe I see as an opportunity.
um,
And that's why when I got into the point of the one piece of me that wasn't quite being satisfied was the entrepreneurial side. So when I decided I needed to make that leap, that what I wanted to do my work outside the organizations for organizations versus being in them. So that is where I got to feed my entrepreneurial spirit. So at one point I made that pivot and I did some other things to really, create credibility as a conflict resolver. I did, I worked for the stock exchanges and I've done a lot of arbitration for customer cases as well as employment cases. I was got some connections with some judges in courts and I got appointed to help high conflict families and be a neutral. Um, I started teaching, which all happened by accident, but it comes back to where I loved my little tutoring business that I had as a young person. And that was all because I took a course at NYU where it was a real practical course. We got to mediate and arbitrate cases in court. And when I finished the course, I stayed in touch with the instructors. And every time they needed to be away from the class, they would ask, well, would you like to volunteer and fill in? I'm like, sure, why not? And eventually, in a short period of time, one of them had to leave the area and move. So she asked, would you be interested in taking over? Sure, why not? And it became this thing where, and then the co-instructor, he ended up moving and he's like, I teach 4 courses. Would you like to take them over? Sure, why not? So I kept on falling into these things where I'm like, oh, I like teaching. And then that evolved to I want to marry both, like that I worked in organizations and now I've really worked on my skills as a conflict resolver. how can I help people every day manage the conflict that they're encountering in the workplace? And that's how it's evolved into where I am today, where I've really brought that both together, where I help people manage conflict and use the tools they already have with their communication and work with reframing and mindset so that they see conflict as an opportunity like I do, but usually they look at me at first going, an opportunity. Most people want to run from conflict and I help to push them into it.
Wow, Leslie, you've been working in the field that every job that you put that you did earlier always put you onto the seat that you have to deal with conflicts, right? And like you say, everybody hates it, but then you see opportunities in that is because of the mindset. So can since when you really realize that, Leslie?
Um, it's a progression. It's
Ah,
watching I mean, it was times where facilitating other people to resolve their conflicts and empowering them as a mediator and seeing that when I help them hear each other better, suddenly they would look at each other and go, "Oh, I didn't know that's what you were thinking." And the other one will say, "Well, why not? That's what I kept on saying." And that's where I really hone my skills on communication by watching what others do where they don't hear each other. I figured out what the right things to do were. And it's specifically, that's probably one of the biggest sources of conflict, that when we communicate, we're also miscommunicating. And the reason is because we interpret words, phrases, and things differently. We have different experiences. And how can we connect that more? And a lot of it has to do with listening, which many people say, well, I know how to listen. Of course, I know how to listen. And I'm like, yes, passively you're listening, but do you know how to actively listen? And that, and they're like, yeah, yeah. That started to help me see where it appears as if I've made a direct path in my journey, but it was not. You know, when you're in it, you don't even realize you're making some left turns, you're making some twists. Reflecting on it, you can make it sound like, oh yeah, I knew exactly what I was going to do and it all makes sense. But it was the communication that really just, it's fascinating to me to see when there's a disconnect and then finding that path to connection. Um, Hearing people say, we have a conflict, there is no resolution. But if you want to try working with us, go ahead. That's not the exact words, but that attitude is a lot of times what happened when people walked in with me. I'm like, okay, yeah, I agree with you. There probably is no solution, but we're here together. Let's give it a try. And then, as someone who doesn't know the details of their story, being able to see what I call kind of the magic, but it's really not magic, to say to someone, oh, what I hear you saying is, and I'll explain it, they might correct a few items. And then you see the look in the face of the other person like, wow, I had no idea that that's what they were thinking or saying. And to bridge the gap between the disconnect because it's happening all the time. And then you add on the layers of issues we have in organizations, whether it's most um, companies are global. So now we have cultural differences. We have cultural differences even within the United States, whether you're from the East Coast or the West Coast or the South, the Midwest, the North. We all communicate a little bit differently and we see things a little bit differently. And finding that connection between people and becoming much more self aware and aware of others just fascinates me.
Leslie, Imagine, like your job, you deal with companies that are operating globally. You work with a lot of senior leaders and help them to resolve conflicts within their teams or within the management teams, right? So they are the people equipped with a lot of training, equipped with a lot of you know like developments from their organization or through self development, right? So why didn't they realize the differences at the beginning, and that made them to get into conflict so deep in their working life, though?
I can tell you that most people have not had the training that I know we need for conflict and communication. We learn how to write, we may learn how to speak, we may be told, taught how to problem solve, but there's other layers to it where just speaking is not enough. That's not necessarily communication. Communication is when it's bi-directional. And we're very accustomed to saying, I'll just give an example. I'll simplify it a little bit. So a manager would say to me, they didn't deliver what I want. Okay. Well, what's been the communication? Well, they know what I want. I've wanted it before, so they should know what I want. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, how could you communicate that? What are you looking for? And then they'll just look at me and go, oh, so maybe I should actually say it out loud. Yes, like that voice in our heads and the assumptions prevent people from doing actual communication. It takes time. I think that's why it's so challenging within the workplace because time is short. We don't have enough of it.
Mm.
Communication takes time. So which do you choose? You just forge ahead, like, let's work on it, let's solve it. And all the communication that should have gone on along the line or even before we started doesn't happen. So I'll just say simply state your expectations. I'm like, well, I think I did you? And most times they didn't. And we're not used to it because they'll be like, so I really have to say it out loud. But once they do it, they're like, oh, wow. And then you have to check in. It's not one way. It's not just like, this is what I want and this is when I need it. There's a back and forth like, hey, do you need, what's going to happen? What's the process here? When should we check in with each other? How can I support you? All of these things have to happen, and we're not doing that intentionally. We're much more, oh, I'm just trying to show, we're texting it on our phone. Hey, I need this report done. Finish that project. That's not necessarily stating expectations. That's just saying a deliverable, but what about all the in between? And we're not used to having those conversations.
So Leslie, what you're saying is that most of our conflicts comes from the way we communicate to one another. So if we can communicate more effectively, then conflicts will reduce drastically. Am I understanding correctly?
That's a big part of it. I would
Yeah.
say a second big part of it is our hesitance to accept differences.
Ah.
That if you and I start a meeting and whatever the topic is, we go, oh, what do you our initial reaction is like, that's too uncomfortable. So we have to find a way to agree. Like everyone wants to get to agreement very quickly. And that's one piece where people rush to agreement and they're really not in agreement because there's this avoidance of differences. And I think we have to look back to like, even just in our personal lives, we'll say to someone, well, that your friend is very different than you. That's fun. It's interesting. Okay. So why isn't that fun and interesting in a meeting to hear a different opinion, to hear a different idea, to hear a different perspective, to hear how, say, I suggest an idea and to ask you hey, please describe my idea, and find out, oh, wow, I didn't even think about it like that. But to be excited to hear the different angle versus feeling like we need to get to an agreement and quick and fast. And I think some of that in workplaces is that so many are based on blame, that it's all about like, hey, who did that wrong? Whose idea was that? And that failure isn't welcomed. Mistakes are like seen as a problem and
Mm.
something you want to get rid of and punish someone for, almost, versus, well, how else? We all talk about it like, hey, we didn't get to successful points without those failures. That's when we learned. Those were the growth opportunities. So that's what I get back to with the reframing and the mindset, that like failure, to me, that's not a bad word. Someone else hears it as a very negative word. It goes back to the word like disruption. Someone who disrupts an industry, apparently that's a very good thing.
Uh-huh.
Particularly in English. I don't know if it necessarily translates to all languages. Well, when I was younger, if you were told you were disruptive, that wasn't necessarily a good thing. You didn't want that on your report card that went home to your parents. So it is how you frame it, and that's the other, like, of the other important component, how we frame things and how we reframe them so we can hear them better.
So how can we help the people to get, better understanding one another and their differences? Leslie.
uh, the the one skill I think we all have to work on, myself included, active listening. I
Active
think
list.
that that's one of the most difficult things to do, and most people think they're doing it well. And it's everything from, we all know, they know the rule. Yep, turn off your electronic, or turn, put away your electronic devices. Um, and I always say, did you turn them away so you can't see them? Because every time a phone lights up with a notification, that glance over to it, that's a distraction. And during those few seconds, if you were talking, I missed half your sentence. So I might be on a totally different assumption of what you're talking about because I missed some of what you said. So, and then when I listen to you, I have to put everything else out of my mind. And that includes, the first thing most of us are trying to do is, we're planning what our response is going to be when you're done talking. Well, if I'm planning my response, that also means I'm not listening to everything you're saying now. And a lot of times we're thinking about maybe a conversation we had with someone else earlier in the day. We may be thinking about, like, oh, what am I going to have for dinner? And all those split seconds or multiple seconds that we're not listening, we missed a lot. So we
Hmm.
have to just be present and not have that pressure of like, hey, what am I going to do when she stops talking? Well, you can pause and think about what you want to ask next, but don't plan what you're going to ask next while I'm talking or while you're talking.
Hmm. Leslie, I like to observe children playing. I spend a lot of time with my three children, and when they were young, they spend a lot of good time with their, like young friends, and they talk a lot and they listen, and they're really good at that. But eventually, when they get older and similar like us, they're not good at listening anymore. So I want to know what happened to us on the way to grow up, and that we lost that beautiful skill, though.
Well, there's a lot of us who try to remind everyone, like, let's get back to our kindergarten skills, because
Yeah.
what we learned in kindergarten, all those things like, share your things, listen to your friends, play together, have fun, laugh together. We forgot what comes naturally to us, that we were given all this time to do these things of just enjoying other people. Didn't matter if someone was different. We just all hung out together. So I think a little bit of it is just reminding ourselves of that beauty. But what happened to us is life, and our worries, our pride, our stress, our anxiety. And that's where mindset comes in. I know that for me, I thought everyone you get brought up in a certain way and you think everyone has that. Now I see the difference where no matter what was happening, I was always shown, like, let's find the positive in it. It doesn't mean that we were ignoring the negative, but we were like digging underneath it and going, oh, there's one positive down there. Uh, and just keep that focus of like, wow, there's always this balance. Like, hey, today maybe more negative happened than positive, but I want to remember the positive and be grateful for that and figure out it makes it easier to manage the negative. So I think that's part of it, that how people proceed with what their mindset is. A growth mindset, it goes back to, if I make a mistake, okay, oh, good. Let's figure out what went wrong. Let's figure out how to change it. What can we change? And other people are like, oh my, I mean, I've heard it from bad bosses in toxic workplaces. Well, I need to first I'll ask them, what do you do with a mistake? First thing, find out who did it, who else knew about it, and take care of that. When that's the first thing, it's no wonder that we've kind of forgotten like those times of play and exploring and discovery. Why is a mistake not an opportunity to discover something new?
Leslie, you mentioned about the word growth mindset, right? And this term has been talked a lot, by many people. But you are the person live example with growth mindset. I want to examine, how, in what way did you it build up inside of you, Leslie? If let me put it in
Yeah,
context. For example, like you've been in the work that you have to deal with conflicts a lot earlier, and then through your career, right? And then where everybody saw it as problem, you saw it as an opportunity. That's a prime example of growth mindset. So I want to go back into your life and to try to figure
sure.
out a aha moment that made you realize that, okay, this is how you grow the growth mindset inside of yourself. So whoever listen to this conversation, they be able to reflect and make changes so that they can, start building growth mindset for themselves.
I think part of it was being curious. Uh, and I could say that I was lucky to learn that early in my career, where all of a sudden I was managing construction. That's when you realize, like, oh, what I learned in theory is not what's going to happen in the real world. And oh my God, how am I going to manage this? I don't even know what we're doing. So I remember the contractor coming up to me and go, all right, I need a decision. Okay, what are we deciding? And he was talking about some electrical panel. Do you want the 60 circuit panel, or do you want the like 200 circuit panel? I just must have looked like, what? He goes, okay, let's go in that room over there for a minute. He goes, I'm not the only one. I don't want you to think I'm biasing you, because obviously 120 circuit panel, the bigger one, costs more. So I'm going to tell you some other people to go and talk to after me. But I'm going to let you know how I came to this decision to offer this to you, because I saw an issue. I'm like, oh, okay. So, he explained everything with capacity, looking forward. He goes, I can tell that your company likes to think forward, you're growing, and this is why I'm making this suggestion. But don't just listen to me, because I'm the one who's going to make extra money. And got me to go, like, kind of forced me, because you have to go meet with, these two other people. That kind of idea was like, oh, wow. I didn't have to know everything. I needed to know who to go and ask, where to collect the information. And it was okay for me to just look at the person and go, wow, he's an expert. And I just said, I don't know. So does, and I didn't, he just looked at me as like, well, we know different things. That doesn't make you less worthy than me. We just are experts in different things. But Leslie, you're going to become, as a project manager, you're going to become the expert in knowing who to bring together and who to ask. So that was part of a lot of situations like that would occur. I do remember one woman who I was mentoring uh, to become, to get promoted. And after a meeting where I didn't think of it as anything big, but it was a whole bunch of people, the room, probably now I reflect back on it, like 30 different vendors and contractors in the room. And we were going over the status of a project. We leave the meeting and she's like, I'm never going to be able to do this. Hold on, you are, but I know me saying that's not going to happen. Let's talk about like what, was uncomfortable. She's like, I'm never going to know everything you know. I go, what in the world do I know? What do I know? She's like, oh, you knew how to answer this, this, and this. Oh, no, you thought that's what I was doing. Did you hear my questions? I knew nothing. I had to collect all the information and then I was able to make a decision of what would be the best choice. And I even said to her, I treat everything like it's my house. Like if someone knocks on my door, my front door, and just tells me, you need this new thing, do you just say yes? No, they're invading my home. This is my house. I've been fine. I need to find out what that is. Maybe it will improve my life. I said, treat work like that. Like if someone's kind of knocking on your door saying you have to make a decision, collect the information you need to make a decision. I didn't see it as a problem. I just saw it as like, all right, I don't know stuff, and it's okay to say I don't know if I go out and learn it. Like, wow, I don't know the answer right now. I'm going to go find out. I think that was a big thing that I didn't know that other people weren't doing. And that's when I saw that mindset and pride and even fears that we have, when we're in the workplace and wanting promotions and wanting to advance. This all impacts us and prevents us from doing what we would have wanted to do instinctively, to say, hey, I don't know, but I'd love to find out how, like, where can I explore this? That's not welcomed in many work environments. I was in a lot of those more toxic work environments where you don't feel comfortable speaking up. You don't feel included. You don't feel like you belong. And it's not okay to ask questions. That's the exact opposite of what we need. We need to be able to dare to disagree. When we're in a meeting, if I have some question about what's being talked about, I should feel comfortable asking it and not feeling like, wow, everyone's going to look at me like I don't know anything. And it's all of those components that add up to why there's not a lot of communication going on, that people fear for their job or fear for the reputation they might have. And being imperfect isn't, they'll say imperfect is in, I can't be perfect. But in their mind, they're thinking, no, no, I have to be perfect to get that promotion. And imperfect is actually much better. And there is nothing that's perfect. That's what makes us all kind of fit together nicely. We all are, have little perfections and a lot of imperfections, and we fit together like a puzzle.
Leslie, I'm a bit um, how do I say I'm a positive person and I believe in good things. I believe in that people going to work, including leaders. Of course, they want to do good things for people, and somehow, somewhere along the way, they've been mentored, they've been coached, they've been managed, they've been having bad example that make them to become leading their teams differently in different ways, right? And but deep down inside of them, they want to leave legacies. They want to do something great for their teams. So how can they make change so that they can help to create an environment that less conflict, or even if there's conflict, they be able to solve it and promote a positive way to handle conflict within the organizations. No.
I think one way to start is accepting that conflict is okay,
Mm.
that we need conflict. It depends on how you treat it. If everything that is a differing opinion is conflict, then you what do you want? Everyone to think the same? Uh, I think it goes back to hiring as well. I know that candidate, they try to find out like, oh, do they think like me? Will they do things in the same kind of process? Is this how they're used to working? Well, wouldn't it be better if I had someone who thinks differently than me? Um, I saw there's a wonderful video called Dare to Disagree, a TED Talk by Margaret Heffernan, and it is called Dare to Disagree. And she talks all about this scientist who actually made sure that the right hand person that was assisting her thought completely different than her, that was constantly challenging her, that was constantly pushing her. And what that did for her is that when she also had to examine and explore what she was doing, then she knew that they were on the right path because she was challenged. The challenge is often seen as conflict in an organization. And that's where, it's like you're supposed to say yes, like to everything. And I mean, yes, agree. And I think a lot of it, you mentioned like people are trained, mentored, coached. I think that a lot of what has happened with people who have risen to high levels is they weren't. They were promoted because they were doing a great job at what they were doing. Did they get leadership training? Probably not. Did they get management training? Did they get even a leadership coach? Then they assume like, well, I got promoted, I'm now a leader. No, a lot of times I think of it as you're a boss. And unfortunately, a lot of times they're a bad boss because they just repeat what other people did to them. They manage in the same way that they were managed, and they never come out of it. And that goes to like how to get yourself out of that cycle is first a lot of self-awareness and figuring out, hey, I must have some weaknesses. So what do I need to work on? And I can't just do it by myself all the time. Like, what are my resources? Is it a training course? Is it reading a particular book that'll give me ideas that I hadn't thought about? Is it asking colleagues to ask me the hard questions so that I can look at myself and go, oh, okay. I know for me, I didn't always know when I'm teaching how to get great feedback. You do. Whether I've done teaching or training, there's always been those surveys afterwards, where people check off and they do some ratings. But I mean the real, from a colleague. And I've been lucky enough to have some colleagues observe me. And especially when I started doing some teaching online, when the pandemic started, I was like, oh my God, how am I going to translate my energy like onto Zoom? I'm not like quite accustomed to this. And luckily I had a colleague who observed me, and she's like, and she was just, we had the real feedback. It wasn't just like, oh yes, Leslie, you were great. No, no, I want to know what parts worked, what parts maybe didn't work so well. Uh, the best part was she told me about something I did so well, and I looked at her and I go, you do know that that was a tech problem. She thought I deliberately had my camera go dark because I was talking about body language. And she's like, oh, that was a fantastic exercise. The students really understood it. And I said, no, my computer really went dark. I couldn't see anything. She's like, oh my God. And what was great, I looked at her and I go, thank you. She goes, for what? I said, you just gave me like this amazing feeling about we all have tech problems. So just go with it and it works. And I said, and obviously it worked. I just went with it and used it. So, but that's what it is, real feedback, not asking your team, how am I doing? Oh, you're doing great, boss. No, real feedback. And we're not accustomed to that in the workplace. You know, back to, I think learning and development has been lacking because people get promoted without it and people don't get it to even maintain where they're working. The other part is when we give feedback, and it's usually a very formal program once a year, like an annual performance review. Those reviews, those should be recaps of what we've been talking about and conversing and communicating about all year. Unfortunately, they're typically surprises that you get your review, whether it's good, bad, or in between, it's a surprise. You've never had that conversation with your manager. And that gets perpetuated where we just don't talk about it. So the leaders aren't getting feedback from their team. Hey, people aren't accustomed to going to their manager and saying, you know, that meeting we had yesterday, that was fantastic how you asked some of those questions. There was one thing I wish we would have had time to do. What, but if I ask them, most people won't go to their manager and say that because that's well, I can't go and criticize my man. Well, is it criticism or is it like, you know, the give and take? So the real give and take conversations, if we did it all year, maybe we'd get a little more accustomed to it rather than waiting for human resources to say, oh, those, we need those reviews, they're due by, you know, whatever, December 15th at 5 p.m. So guess what happens at 9 a.m. on December, whatever date it is? Everyone starts doing the 35 reviews they have to do. So I think that's a big, you know, big part of it. Awareness, self-awareness, and genuine feedback back and forth between managers, colleagues, teams. We don't do it. We just like applauding the wins, but we don't
Um,
talk about like the areas of improvement.
Leslie, there's a lot of things working out there, is checking the box, like you say, and then having that, the actual, the real feedbacks that people are doing with it, the hearts to spend really good time to think and make change. Those are really, really rare out there. So, and then the whole disruption, the whole transform needs to take place with a lot of effort. So where do you see them happening in the future, though?
Uh, I think it will happen. I think one thing that certainly in the United States has been kind of taking the front and center is the issue of where people are going to work, whether they're going to continue working from home, whether they're going to work in a hybrid schedule, or whether they're being directed to come back to the office. So that has taken such prevalence, you know, and so much time and energy in people's minds. I think until that's resolved, it's hard to talk about like, hey, how are we going to work better together? What can we do to help each other grow? Not just as individuals, how to grow. If I grow and we all grow, the company's going to grow. And it's getting back to the people, and it's people first. And I think the people matter. And right now, there's just a lot of, at least here in the United States, still a lot of directives coming out and mandates. This is how we're going to do the schedule. This is what's going to happen. And that is creating the discourse where there's honestly, there's a lot of talking at each other and not with each other. So
Wow.
until that's resolved, I don't see people talking about, well, let that when they're so focused on where am I working? What is my, where can I find a company that's not just going to dish out a mandate, that they're going to help me grow and give me the tools to grow so that they can grow?
So where do you see it's gonna come? Whether, we will go back, or like working in the office and hybrid or remote completely. What did you see, Leslie?
I think it's going to be hybrid in many companies. Uh, but the one thing for me that's just makes me giggle a little bit about this whole thing, I worked hybrid most of my career. And I didn't know there was a word for it. I was just like, I'm working. Some days I had to be at home. I remember saying to a manager, like, oh, I have that call in the morning. So I'm going to do that at home so that I can be in a private area. And then I'll go to that other meeting or what. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That sounds great. Um, I remember I had most often I had bosses. My managers were rarely with me physically. They were in other locations, sometimes other states. So I was accustomed, to me, it was always remote. I was always working remote from the team I was reporting to. So I think that we need to be flexible, but not to the point where we're all like, well, I want to work at home only. Well, I, I think you're missing out on a lot of interactions. Yes, you and I, this is amazing because we can't just meet in a coffee shop to talk to each other. The physical distance makes it impossible. Even our time zone differences is a challenge. So for us, this is so much better than not meeting, not talking to each other and just emailing each other. So this is great, but we need to mix all the alternatives. If I just go from I used to be in the office to not being in the office, well, where are all those interactions happening, the casual ones? Because I could tell you that some of my best contacts in my network are people that I met by accident in an office or in a workplace where they were the person that happened to go to that corner coffee shop the same day as me every day. We would have never met each other because our formal jobs didn't intersect. But as it turns out, our projects needed to intersect, and we would have never been able to chat about that because most times it went through formal channels, that informal meetups. So that's where when someone says, I can only work remote, do you want to start to build a network? I don't believe you can only build it online because you see people cheering it on, like when even people who met on LinkedIn and they finally meet in real life, they're like, it's amazing community to meet people on LinkedIn. It is powerful, it's magical, it is fabulous. And then when you meet in real life, like the joy you see in their face that further connects them is amazing. So I think there's a mix, but I think it depends on the function of the job. It can't just be dictating everyone needs to be in the office. Well, when you have those big open offices, I remember not being able to talk on the phone. So I needed part of my day to be at home so that, or some private space that wasn't available to me. So thinking about job function, and this brings me back to my original career where my first couple of years at Cornell, I was studying interior design, not architecture, interior design. And we were all about, we wanted to find out how people needed to function, and then we will build the space that will support those functions. And I think we're back to that. Like, figure out how people function, deliver the space and the mixture that whatever works for their, and it may come down to each job. Like, hey, what is your job function? What needs to happen here? What do you need to do? But we need to mix in the human encounters too, because otherwise, is there really a connection? And I personally, I would miss out on those. I call it the water cooler talks, those fabulous people you meet when you're walking to the elevator or going to fill your water bottle. You can't
Yeah.
meet them as easily on Zoom. I now have to schedule. I have to know who you are. I don't even know who to call because I don't know who those informal meetups are going to be. So I think flexibility and agility is important for everybody.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And I totally believe that too. I agree with you. So, Leslie, I have two last questions for the conversation today. All right. And during the conversation, you mentioned the word thinking numerous times. So changing the thinking and stuff like that. My wife and I, we've been on the quest to help people to improve their ability to think because we believe that every good change happened with the good thinking at the beginning, right? So, with every experts that we got a chance to talk to, we asked this question, and this question I'm asking you. So, Leslie, how have you been growing your thinking over the years?
Uh, I would say that the thought that has helped me grow the most is realizing that if I have the mindset and believe something can happen, whether it be specific to a conflict, like this conflict is going to be resolved, even when I don't know the path to get there, the believing it helps me to see and have that vision and perception. The other piece, so the believing I'm going to fix and resolve this even when I have no idea how to do it will get me there. That determination. Second is, I would say, I'm trying to think of what would be the most important because of course I have quite a few. uh I still think that's the most important one, the believe that it will happen. And oh, I think awareness of perspective. And I call it like change your view, where many of us will say, I might say to someone, we need to like look at that objectively. And some will go, well, I am looking at it objectively, which is very difficult to do because we're all subjective people. We bring our experiences. But finding ways to be more objective has helped me see things in broader perspectives and figure out where to focus when I need to focus. And I kind of do it like put myself in the balcony, so to speak. Um,
Uh,
it's figurative, but physically, like thinking of yourself in the balcony and looking at all the things that are in front of you and seeing that broader perspective and then focusing. Because a lot of times we focus too much, where, I'll have someone come and go, I can't work with that person. And they're so focused on that one bad conversation. And then I'll just say, well, you've been working with them for 25 years, broadening. So let's talk about, what has gone well and what changed. So it's that broadening and the broad perspective and the focus and figuring out how to balance that and use both are key.
Beautiful. So believing that you can, find the solutions and then try to be aware of your perspective and change your view, right? So that is the techniques that you are applying, so that helping you to grow your thinking ability over the years. I know that more, then we can get back to that at a later time. So the last question, Leslie, we've been traveling to the past to know what was your dream when we were young, right? We figured out the journey that took you to what you are doing now. And let's travel to the future a little bit. Is there anything exciting that Leslie is doing she want to share with us so together we can celebrate with her in advance?
Well, I would tell you I'm in the middle of that right now. And it started towards the end of the pandemic where I wanted to share more about like who I am, what I know, these, bite-sized strategies that I love sharing in the blog. And I want to make that bigger, whether it's that recently I started doing YouTube videos, again, to share what I know and to give empower people to realize like it's one skill at a time that we can turn into a habit. So I think it's more along that path, that it's building these online courses so I can um, engage with more people. to get the word out, because like you know that I don't, it's seen as this brick wall conflict, and I kind of want to knock the bricks off the brick wall. Uh, and work smarter, not harder, of figuring that out, which is always hard. I could tell you that if I say this out loud now, I'm going to have to do it. There will definitely be a book in my future, because my goal is I want to communicate in multiple ways, because I know that we all each have our preferences of how we want to hear and absorb information. So I want to deliver the things that I've learned in all my decades of a career, and deliver it in a way that is, you want to receive it in, whether it's to see and hear me, whether it's to read it, whether it's to engage with me and actually have a conversation. I just want to kind of keep on diversifying how I share information.
Wow. Leslie, and I really like the 1 minute video that you share on your LinkedIn post also. And here's the thing, I believe that we as human beings we want to have good relationship with people. Just along the way, life has its way to make relationship go differently. So if we know how to resolve our conflict, how do we understand conflicts where it coming from, and how we individually can take place to make it better, to help to solve it, then imagine how beautiful our relationship, our communities, our work's gonna be, right? So I thank you for doing all of that amazing works. And Leslie, please write that book, please build more channels that you can share your works, your expertise, your tips and techniques to help people to change and manage conflicts better. And thanks for doing that. All right.
Well, and thank you for this great opportunity to further get to know you, and to spend this hour with you and talking about things. And I love that we're connected, and I look forward to when we will meet in person.
Me too, me too. I look forward to seeing you either in Vietnam or April of next year when I'm in New York City. So, Leslie, have a wonderful day. Enjoy the day, and I look forward to seeing you. Thank you very much for spending your time with us. And Leslie,
Yes.
Leslie, I could not hear you. Can you
You
say the
can't
last
hear
words
me
again?
now?
Yeah, I
Oh,
could hear you
so,
about 20 seconds. Yes.
oh, thank you so much. I look forward to when we can meet in person.
Me too, me too. All right, Leslie. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye for now, all right?